Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the DF Retro Super Show, the podcast where we talk about games, technology, and history in great depth. I'm joined once again by my wonderful co-hosts, first starting with my good buddy Audi Sorlie.
Good to be back. I just ate tuna right before recording and didn't take out my dishes, so this is going to be a challenging episode to get through.
Indeed, but you got the Turtles hoodie for those watching the video version, so hopefully that'll help fight that crime that you've just committed. Next up we have Coury Carlson.
Hey, I'm just enjoying my coffee this morning in my I'll take a potato chip and eat it mug. So let's ready to talk some games.
Last but not least, we have Try.
Hey,
or Marc Triforce Duddleson, as we like to say.
Yeah, I'm glad I did not eat any of what Audi just ate because I wouldn't be making it through this stream. Tuna does not agree with me.
Oh boy,
Really?
But what does agree with us is awesome retro games, and today we have a brand new topic for you guys to enjoy. We're talking about graphics and effects in classic games that we feel are still impressive today. But before we get to our main topic, it's time for the news. Audi Sorlie, what's happening in the world of retro news these days?
It's time for the DF Retro Super Show news.
I think the big news this week, right, was the release of the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. Did any of you play it?
I have played it quite a bit, actually.
Looking forward to getting it just for the documentary stuff.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of good stuff in there. That's actually the main draw for me, based on what I've experienced thus far. The documentary stuff is super rich and detailed, lots of cool videos, assets. Although it does make me pine for additional emulation. Like, when they're talking about Narc, I'm like, I just want to click a button and play Narc. Like, why can't I do that? But so that stuff is awesome, though, overall. What's less awesome is the actual emulation, and it does sound like they're doing some work on it still, which is unfortunate, but there's a few issues. Input lag is not great, especially on PS5, where it's really bad on PS5.
It is quite something.
And it's bad enough in the arcade games, but some of the console games, they all have problems to different degrees. But like the Sega ones, I think, for instance, and some of the others, feels like you press a button, wait, and then it moves.
Yeah, when we did we did a documentary about the first game, and the Super Nintendo Championship Edition, as it was called, has major input lag. It is so delayed, but we did discover that the Super Famicom version had it kind of optimized, so there's a difference between those regions.
Do you think it has something to do with how they handled like the weird refresh rates from the arcade games?
Not for the other console games, totally unrelated.
Yeah.
It is a shame though that they didn't grab the Super Famicom version of the Super NES game though, because it is not localized into Japanese. It just plays better.
Yeah, it plays much better.
Beyond the input lag, though, they didn't really come up with a solution for the inconsistent refresh rate, or basically MK runs at like 54 hertz or something in the arcade. So on a 60 hertz screen, it's kind of juddery. We know there's ways to solve this. Maybe not for everyone, but at the very least, you could implement like proper VRR support on the consoles that support it, and that would get rid of it, as it does in stuff like MAME. There is no attempt to do that here, which is a bummer. And also there's some sound issues. I think like the 32X version sounds not right. And just the whole thing, like there's just a lot of rough edges with the emulation. So the way I look at it right now is like it's an awesome museum piece that lets you sample the games in an imperfect way.
Digital Eclipse is pretty good about adding stuff and fixing stuff, so hopefully it won't be too long.
Exactly. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah,
it's a shame it launched in this way, but hey.
I would trust, they're among the ones I trust the most to just kind of fulfill their destiny here and like make it a great product in the end. But it did come out of the gate kind of uneven. My biggest gripe with it is kind of one that I've had with a lot of the Goldmaster series is just the narrative structure. Is that it's very front-loaded with the documentary stuff, but there is kind of, it fizzled out a bit, and then there's no kind of wrap-up. It feels very much like once you're out of the 1 and 2 / a little bit of 3, you're kind of left with not as strong of a narrative on the documentary history stuff. And it's kind of one of the things that I always feel when I play the Goldmaster stuff.
After 4, you have Special Forces and Sub-Zero. So
hey, I love
all
mythologies,
those are
man.
kind of
Don't you knock mythologies. That is some Audi jank. I love that whole game. I love the premise. I love just the idea. It's like if you played Batman Forever and said, I want more. Also, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D is out, and I know, Try, you're pretty much into these HD 2D games.
Oh, yeah, I'm a big Dragon Quest fan. So for Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D, I played most of it on PS5 Pro, a little bit of it on base PS5. And what I found in both of them was that if you just play on the graphics mode instead of the performance mode, it's still 60 frames per second. I didn't notice any issues in the game on PS5 Pro. That's not to say they might not be there, but base PS5 is actually pretty good in that mode as well. I didn't run into that many obvious or sustained drops. I don't have any frame rate data on that or anything, but I would imagine it's pretty similar for PS5 players for the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D. I'm not the biggest fan of the original Dragon Quest, so I'm curious to see if anything in this version kind of endears me to it a little bit more, but I think Dragon Quest 2 is definitely a little underrated, and I hope people will enjoy it with this one.
I can say, though, that I did very briefly check it out on Switch 2, and the performance mode is a nice 60 FPS.
Nice.
As you look at, but quality mode is just 30. So,
okay, yeah. People have been really curious about the Switch 2 version for HD 2D games in general, so I'm glad to hear that.
It's definitely a lot better than Switch 1 games, as you would hope and expect. But yeah, you have to give up some image quality to get that smooth 60.
Kind of retro adjacent, but quickly we should talk about a game that you kind of mentioned to me, and I've been very curious about, is Absalom.
Actually, yeah. So this is funny how this works out, because this is on my radar. It's one I had been wanting to play, but it was actually Coury who was like, dude, you need to play this right now. And I actually had the game ready to go, and I was like, all right, let me hop on. And my goodness, it is tremendous. And we might do something more on this at some point. Basically, this is from Guard Crush, the guys that co-developed Streets of Rage 4, which was an incredible brawler. And boy, they've essentially taken that same technology, their own in-house engine. It's not Unity or Unreal or anything. And they have taken that and built a new game that I think, Coury, you kind of described. It's like a bit of Golden Axe meets the Capcom Dungeons and Dragons games meets like Hades.
Yeah, with a little bit of Dragon's Crown in there. It's so good. I put about 30 hours into it. And there's a bunch of content. But even after you unlock everything, it's the battle system is so good that you get addicted to it, and you want to see how you can build your character to just get these crazy combos.
It's truly probably among the best brawling I've ever seen in this style of game, like possibly ever made. Like, it's that good. Yes. These guys genuinely understand how to make this sort of game in a way that, like, they're building on the classics, as they did in Streets of Rage 4, and they've taken it even further this time. And I think one of the key things to note, Coury, for people, because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it looked cool, but I don't like roguelites. And I would say this does not. I would say it's actually beneficial to it.
Yes.
It's a good thing in this case. They did not, it's not just a bunch of randomly generated levels that go on and on. There's actually like real design here, and works super well.
But there's 4 characters total. You unlock 2 during the progress of the story, and everybody plays very differently.
Yeah.
So I was under the impression, I never tried it, but there was a roguelite expansion added to Streets of Rage 4 at one point. And I wonder if that was the test bed for this.
I never tried that either.
One. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was in the last update for it.
By the way, you mentioned updates. I did want to very quickly toss something in here, just as a quick mention. The Gradius collection that I looked at on Digital Foundry, actually, Gradius Origins from M2, that just got a new patch, finally. And here's what they've added. They've added a lot of stuff, but I have to point this out for all you retro fans and all you guys here. They added black bars. They added black bars. They got rid of the gray borders. At last, you can turn off the background, and it's just pure black. when we visited M2 back in September at their Tokyo office, I pushed this very hard again, and they said, "Yes, we've heard, we listen." It's like it's in the next patch, and finally, it really was in the next patch. It did happen. So here it is, black bars, baby.
Honest.
So yes, I just wanted to pop in and say that.
So guys, you guys love great games, right?
Oh yeah,
I love great games.
So we all know about Sword of Sodan. Large characters, blood and gore.
Whoa. Did I just hear Sword of Sodan?
You sure did. We're talking about the greatest.
No. This is truly one of the world's most notorious Kusoge, I think. It is not a good game. I hate Sword of Sodan so much. This came in I got a job lot of Japanese Mega Drive games, and two of the games in there, one was Toki, and the other one was Sword of Sodan. Like, compared to Sword of Sodan, Toki is like game of the year, game of the century material.
Sure.
Sword of Sodan is just
Toki.
No, Sword of Sodan.
I hate Toki.
No.
Toki sucks.
Yeah. I don't like
It's a monkey
Toki,
that
but
spits at you.
Yeah, but Sword of Sodan is like, you're just a tall dude. Okay, so here's the thing. Y'all, I mean, we all know this. It was even made reality, but there's that Waterworld game in that episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Sword of Sodan is that fake Waterworld game.
It inspired
that's
culture,
what it is
what you're saying. So, naturally...
So wait, why did you bring up Sword of Sodan?
Because we are in the correct timeline, and we are now getting Sword of Sodan...
No, please.
2.
Oh, no. What?
Now...
They're making...
I have to say... kind of the selling point for me. So I actually played Sword of Sodan on Amiga, and the kind of selling point was large characters, a ton of detail, and gore and the medieval things like
severed heads.
Yeah, so it was sort of like playing a cutscene is the closest thing I can say at the time when it came out. It was very much like interacting with kind of like a full illustration rather than small characters.
This does remind me of FMV games.
Yeah, prototype. So here we have a game that, there's not much in the way of footage. There's only a screenshot, but still, the characters are kind of blocky and small, and it kind of... I don't know if the lore of Sword of Sodan is what I'm looking to have continued. I think I would have rather had, hey, now they're even larger. Or like a crossover with China Warrior.
It looks like they just picked up a license that no one cared about, and they're making a regular okay game out of it.
Well, who would ever do
looks
that?
Like nothing you'd want from a
That's like remaking Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. So this week, actually, two legends of the emulation scene seems to have resurfaced, because So Far, from So Far's Domain, interviewed the creator of ZSNES. And Coury, you took a look at this, right?
Zofar has been doing pretty regular streaming on Twitch, but he's also been doing some YouTube stuff. Usually it's interviews, and this was a big get for him. He popped in on the My Life in Gaming stream chat on Twitch a couple days ago, and he's like, it's by far and away the biggest video that he's ever had. Previously, he did an interview with Jenny Stigel from during the whole Working Designs Lunar kerfuffle that was happening. But this is a really interesting get for him, and something that is tied closely to Zofar's domain, his website that's been around for almost as long as I've been on the internet. I think where I would go to download music and stuff. But it's just a very good interview and very enlightening, and it's interesting to hear about the process for developing this emulator before there was really any of this functionality in place, just kind of figuring it out on his own. So very, very enlightening and fun for people who grew up playing games on emulators, for sure.
I think that's an episode we should do eventually. It's like emulation history, just like our own introduction to emulation and how we got into it.
Right.
And ZSNES would definitely be on that list. Also, really awesome video that I checked out this week, Tito from Macho Nacho So you guys remember that when John definitely remembers this, when the Xbox was revealed, the prototype was a big X, and I think you can even unlock it in the Dead or Alive beach volleyball game, right? It's
also a Ninja Gaiden, I think.
Ninja Gaiden, yeah, it might be. Maybe it's both of them. I just remember kind of seeing it in an actual game. But this is a gigantic X, a metallic X. And while this isn't the actual prototype that's resurfaced, because I think a few of them are still out there somewhere, Tito actually kind of sat down, designed the unit with new parts. And so it has like the disk drive on the back and everything functioning. But it isn't necessarily the prototype that we saw in the videos. Did you check this out, John?
Yeah, I did. Dude, I cannot believe the lengths he went to make this darn thing. It's very funny. It's very involved. I recommend just sitting down, giving this a watch, because the video itself is pretty impressive, as is the amount of work that he poured into actually making this darn thing happen. I mean, this X was never actually intended to be what the console would look like. It was just like a way to show off, their jump into that console space. So it is called the Big X.
It's like the boomerang.
Now it's real.
Remember the boomerang controller? Just kind of like,
man.
It wasn't meant to be that
Exactly.
way. It's just a prototype.
Exactly. So yeah, that's cool stuff. I'm happy that it exists, and yeah, go check out his video.
Yeah, he did a great job with it, and he worked on that video for about a year, and seeing all the moving parts to make all these aspects of it fall into place is pretty impressive. I mean, we've had the pleasure of knowing Tito for a long time. Like even before he started his channel, he met us at a MagFest and said, "Hey, can I take a picture with you guys?" Before he'd even started a channel, and it's very cool to see that he was inspired by us, but now he is the master.
Oh yeah, and Audi and I, yeah. Audi and I hung out a bunch with him at the Hartford convention, Retro World Expo last year. Yeah. I mean, he's exactly as cool and chill as you would hope and expect.
Oh, one of the nicest, yeah. So I'm very happy to see this video. I was very happy to see him again because we had a great time with him, and hopefully we go back. All of us can go to Retro World sometime because that's a great convention. So a little plug-in for them there. So in a segment I should be calling Horny for Homebrew because I always keep talking about it. We got a new Sonic game, and it's for a console that brings a lot of joy to people's hearts. The GX4000 is back, baby. We got Sonic GX, and this one has been in the works for I think over a decade. I remember kind of just hearing about this when Googling GX4000 games and conversions and whatnot. But it's finally here, and pretty good. I don't know if any of you checked it out, but I played it. Did any of you play it?
It's one of the rare consoles I do not own. I've been tempted before. This actually makes me want to get into it because they're actually doing some cool stuff that makes it look better than the original.
We'll talk more about the GX4000 in our special episode only about that coming soon to this podcast. But the GX4000 is a pretty good console if you use conversions. Like you have RoboCop 2, which is an excellent conversion, but people also put Amstrad games over. So there's actually a lot of games you can play on it with a flash card. But yeah, this one, pretty similar to the Master System Sonic, but it also has its own exclusive bonus stages, which is kind of based on the second game that you run into the screen with line scrolling. And it's really neat. It's really well done. The music is excellent. So if you're interested, definitely check this out. Don't be discouraged by the GX4000 part. There is actually great software on it.
It is worth noting for most of the audience that is probably saying, what the heck is a GX4000? It is a console from the company Amstrad, Lord Alan Sugar's company. They made computers. They were big in the UK. They decided to, at this point in Europe, release their own game console back in 1990 even. And it's woefully underpowered compared to the Mega Drive PC Engine and the soon-to-be released Super Famicom. So it's not a great machine, and it also looks very cheap. And obviously, it was not a success at all. It never saw release anywhere else. and as a it's kind of left. It's an echo of the past, but we love to look at it because it is this silly, weird little console
with a very strong homebrew scene. Very
with
strong.
A weirdly strong homebrew scene.
I mean, Coury and I got to see one at Evan Amos's house, who's the guy that makes all of the awesome Wikipedia photos of game art.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a neat console. I think it's neat. So definitely, if you need an introduction to the console, this is a good game to start with. Or RoboCop 2. Both of them work. And then last on the news segment for this episode, one that was very unexpected, just snuck in via 2chan, I think, which definitely a place to dump your shit. The the Splatterhouse Famicom RPG, which was only really known through word of mouth on certain like articles. There's been a video that showed off some unused chibi Splatterhouse stuff. So there's been like inklings that this existed, but now it's confirmed and fully dumped. So this is a Splatterhouse Famicom RPG, the sequel of sorts to the Wanpaku, whatever it's called, the Splatterhouse.
Wanpaku Graffiti.
Yeah, Wanpaku Graffiti.
I know you're not a fan of that one, Audi. I like it. I think it's pretty good.
I don't know.
It's fine.
I remember having an argument with John about this when we made our Splatterhouse episode, which does not mention this game because no one knew about it. Did any of you have any knowledge of this prior to it dumping?
Oh yeah. This no.
This one.
No, none. Zero. This is complete news to me.
I love Sweet Home, so it would be awesome to try another Famicom horror themed RPG.
I think the most neat thing, this is how I felt when SimCity was dumped finally too, is like this gives us a new authentic NES/Famicom soundtrack to listen to. Something that was made back then, that hasn't been heard before. And the music here, it's all right. it's nothing that will blow your mind socks off, but like I never felt Splatterhouse had the strongest musical sense anyway. But I do love just the fact that we're getting these unknown games. There's been quite a few of them in the last few years that just kind of popped up. We're still waiting for Food Fight, the prototype, to show up though. On PlayStation 2.
Yes, we are all waiting for Food Fight.
The prototype.
How complete is it?
I think it is fairly complete. And I saw, as of this recording, that Gideon Z was working on a translation for it. So for most people, they can probably enjoy it in English fairly soon. The tools have been released also to work on it. So the community jumped on it very quickly and cataloged stuff. And there's even, now that this was dumped, there was a Namco art video, an official one on YouTube, where they showed off, hey, there is this unknown Splatterhouse game that was never released on Famicom. And turns out, here we go. Here's the game that was associated with. So, we have cover art and everything.
It was indeed a known thing. I realize now. It's just it was not widely known. So now we have the game. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think there was like just smattering that something was made for Famicom but never released. Pretty late though, 1993 I think the copyright is. So probably why they just moved on and didn't release it.
The promotional video is from 1992 December. So it was expected to be released after that.
Wow. Yeah,
but anyway, so I think that's going to cover all the news this week. That was a lot of news. Let us know how much did you guys enjoy the news segment? Let us know in the comments or wherever on the Discord. But now it's time to get into the main topic for the show. Graphics and effects in classic games that are still impressive today. Let's go. Being here on Digital Foundry, I think about graphics a lot. Pretty much every day at this point. But we're largely focused on new and cutting-edge techniques. That is, except when talking about the DF Retro series, which was very specifically built to talk about cool tech in old games. And that's what we're going to do today. So I asked everyone here to think of several different examples, 3 to 5 examples from classic games or series of games featuring visual effects or techniques or things that still stand out today as being something cool. So for me, I really look back at something very simple: moving 3D skies. Okay, now this sounds silly, but if you ever played Quake,
Of course.
you look up at that sky and the clouds are moving really fast.
Holy
It's
crap.
still, to this day, I still, when the weather is inclement and the clouds are moving quickly in real life, I'm like, oh shoot, we got Quake weather. It's how I feel.
We got Quake weather.
So
That sounds apocalyptic.
We need a T-shirt of that.
Yeah,
Just a rainy cloud that says we got Quake weather coming.
we got Quake weather, baby. So that was actually the first time I recall personally seeing it, but it's an effect that kind of existed for a while. So 3D shooters, by the time Quake shipped, were still relatively new, right? Stuff like Doom was out there. And up until that point, games that were doing sort of this 3D shooting sort of design would just use like a flat 2D background for the sky. That was sort of parallax against the 3D, right? You all know Doom, the mountains, Duke Nukem 3D, well, which will come around the same time as Quake. They all work this way, but then Quake comes out here, and it may not be the first, but it's the first I remember, but they actually used the concept of a 3D skybox. That is, outside the level geometry was this like cloud system that completely surrounded all the structures. So anything from within the structure of the map viewing out through like a window, you would actually see clouds moving. And they actually used two different independent layers that would sort of scroll in real time. It looked really cool. And weirdly enough, it's something they gave up when they made Quake 2. But I was just making a video recently on the original Unreal, and it really struck me there that Unreal like just takes that concept and goes nuts with just these gorgeous colored skies with multi-layer parallax scrolling. You've got a new mountain layer on top of it so that it doesn't just look like the wraparound sort of like 3D spherical square or whatever like that you saw in Quake. It actually feels like real clouds above the player, and it's super immersive looking and just beautiful. And then that continued with stuff like, and I'll probably end it here because it kind of changes after this, but something like the original Halo. Halo went nuts with skyboxes. They had moving clouds, they had moving water, they extended things way into the distance. The whole idea was you're faking the sense of scale by creating something that exists outside the play area and then moving it around. So when I say moving clouds in games, this is what I'm talking about. But of course, there's a lot of other different effects that we can talk about dating from 16-bit era up through like PS360. Like, you know, I talked about parallax clouds in the 3D game, but there's a lot you can do with parallax scrolling as well, right, Coury? Like, you've seen stuff where you might have some cool like line scrolling, you might have some other effects. I think you picked one that was especially interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different line scrolling examples that I wrote down here because, you know, it just gives that 3D look. And I didn't understand what line scrolling was when it's just like each like scan line moves at a different speed and can go, you know, left and right. I remember seeing it and being the most impressed with it in on the floor in Street Fighter 2. But, you know, there's a lot of other examples that just go so far and above and beyond with that. The example that I wrote down here is level 1 in The Adventures of Batman and Robin on the Sega Genesis, which is, you know, you're running through the city, and the city is, it's almost as though the camera is placed a little bit higher.
Yeah, it's like on a
so that it
like
gives it it's almost like an L shape.
Yeah.
Like a diorama of sorts. And you know, the buildings like move at different speeds at the top, and the ground moves at a different speed. But then later on, fire bursts out of the buildings and it's like waving back and forth. It's just pretty incredible to see that coming out of the Genesis.
It looks so 3D. It's very convincing.
It does. But it's really just clever use of shadow and shading, right? Because one of the limitations of line scrolling back then, so the idea, like you said, you're updating the position of that line per scan line to sort of like give it this 3D effect, but it also means that you're still using just a single background layer to do it. So you can't actually have overlapping scrolling. So like on those buildings, they have these ledges that actually look 3D that you're running on. But if you actually pay really close attention to it, you'll see there's black shadows around everything in just such a way that nothing will overlap another part of the scene. Specifically, like where the edges hang off, you actually have the black alleys, right? And those alleys are totally dark. So your brain interprets this as like, oh, there's like a 3D ledge here.
Yeah.
But it's actually just part of that line scrolling trick.
It's very demo scene-y, right? But unfortunately, that's about kind of the only trick it has because it's just very repetitive. It goes on for a long time.
I don't know about that.
The actual gameplay design is not that great and very punishing.
Yeah, it
could have been a lot better.
It's not the best game. I was thinking about this example actually, Coury, and the one that I was gonna mention is Aladdin on Master System. Like when you run through those streets, I think that's like one of the most impressive, like of the era, impressive showcases of that. Because like the first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it.
And seeing that on the Game Gear and Master System, where you're running on the rooftops, I was surprised to see it in games for that system.
Yeah,
because even though it's very subtle, but once you notice it, I was immediately impressed.
Yeah. Well, a similar kind of thing I wrote down is, just line scrolling tricks in games like Rad Racer, 3D World Runner for the NES. There's something kind of lost, I think, when we made the shift, like at least on the Nintendo side to the Super Nintendo, and you've got the Mode 7, tilt and rotation effects, Audi, I know you and Randy Linden joined me and Coury on a stream, and Randy did show us how some people had actually done simulation of hills with Mode 7. But I do feel like for the most part, something was kind of lost in that shift to flat planes for 3D. And there's always something that impresses me when I go back and look at games like Rad Racer and see that you've got those hills on an 8-bit system with this Z-axis motion. I don't know. There's something about that kind of impresses me in a way where I'm like, wow, we kind of lost something for a few years shifting to Mode 7 or, maybe the infinite planes on Saturn or something like that.
But at the same time, Mode 7 obviously allowed you to do things at a higher frame rate.
Oh,
Cool.
absolutely. And it has its own charm. It has its own charm, but it wasn't you won some and you lost some, right?
That's true. But I think that the key thing to put the cherry on top for line scrolling techniques is that because it just uses CPU time, it doesn't necessarily rely on any specific tricks of the VDP, which is why developers were able to execute this on lower end hardware. It's why we sometimes saw parallax scrolling effects on the NES, for instance, because, it was a programming trick and it was a very cool one. And these games did a great job. You mentioned Aladdin as well, and another Game Gear / Master System one that comes to mind is Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah,
there's interstitial sections where you're driving the Jeep with some really deep line scrolling. But then, of course, on the more powerful systems, you actually get a combination of line scrolling with overlapping objects and layers. I mean, Donkey Kong Country does this. I always thought that it looked better than the CG sprites itself. Thunder Force 4 is always a go-to on the Mega Drive for like just a crazy amount of layers happening at once. And Sonic, of course, Sonic makes amazing use of line scrolling and overlapping parallax.
If you're playing any game from this era and you notice that the background layer is the separation is along a straight flat line, you can kind of bet on it being line scrolling. And, ever since I saw your Donkey Kong Country video, John, like I've been on the lookout for stuff like that. And you notice it all the time once you understand how it works.
That's an interesting one, but you actually mentioned something earlier, Tri, that I wanted to jump in with, and that is the infinite planes of the Sega Saturn, and specifically the creative ways in which this was used. So on paper, this is something similar to Mode 7, really, right? Where you have a tile map, where you make up a large plane that consists of different art tiles. Obviously, Saturn could do this with greater resolution, and there was some additional functions that were possible with it versus Mode 7. But that was the gist, right? But what's cool about Saturn's use of these is that a lot of games combine that with traditional, well, not traditional, the Saturn version of polygon rendering, the quads, where they would essentially create a flat scene and then build the polygons on top of it. This is something that makes Grandia so impressive to me. When you get into that first town, like all the roads, the beautiful pixel art roads, the grass, everything that you walk on, that's all just a flat infinite plane. But they built the 3D buildings and structures and everything on top of it. So you have this really bustling, it feels like this weird combination of pixel art graphics with 3D polygons. And it's something the PlayStation was not able to replicate in that version of the game, because the memory required to replicate that effect, where it's actually like a full tile map's worth of unique information in textures, wasn't really feasible. So it ends up just looking like nonsense ground on PlayStation.
Nonsense ground.
And this is also exactly nonsense ground. That should be a t-shirt. But
Another one.
there's also stuff like the Panzer Dragoon games, of course.
I think Panzer Dragoon 2 is my go-to.
2 is insane. They're able to do these just vast open locations that just stretch off forever.
Yeah, like ones where you walk by like the hillsides on foot on Panzer Dragoon 2 is like really good.
But Audi, you mentioned parallax on some lower tier systems already, but we've also seen this on C64, which got me thinking about another aspect of C64 games that still looks amazing today. It's also, you often saw it on Amiga back then, and it's rotoscoping.
Yeah, I mean, that was my go-to for this episode, because when I grew up with the Commodore, and I remember still to this day how I felt the first time I loaded up Epic's Summer Games. And you saw like the opening ceremony, and they used the animation system that I think was created for Impossible Mission. It has to kind of run cycle from that, but it was so lifelike. And it's funny because like you can watch this footage right now and you see it clearly what it is. But when I think about myself as a 4.5-year-old booting this up for the first time, I still see a real person running across the screen. Still to this day in my mind, I still see that. I couldn't imagine how we're going to go further than this. I've had that feeling many times playing games throughout my childhood, where it's like, we can't go further. This is it. This is a real person firing up the Olympics here. And throughout the game, I mean, just like the smoothness of it really mesmerized me. And it actually was my introduction to stuff like Ralph Bakshi and stuff, where I started watching animation that specifically was rotoscoped. Old Disney used that technique as well. And there are games like Impossible Mission 2 on NES and such, but the C64 does a much better job at properly making use of this system from Epix, so it's much smoother. So I was just like, I couldn't believe how smooth this was, and it led me into also things like Another World and Flashback. I was just always mesmerized by the idea of tracing something to create this lifelike smooth animation, and the fact that it was so well done. Even I would say this was better than a lot of the games that would come after it for a long time, up until like Flashback probably and Another World. So the rotoscoping in games, even though it's a simple trick in terms of what they're doing, I always felt that the results of it was absolutely incredible for the time.
And then you see it also in like Karateka and of course Prince of Persia.
It makes me think of how you've got those kind of FMVs on, especially on PC Engine and to some extent as well on Sega CD, where, well, I shouldn't say FMVs, but, you know, you've got like these mostly like anime character scenes where, you know, they are animated in such a clean way, and you lost some of that with the broad shift to FMV, and the damage of that was seen in Flashback itself.
Oh God,
when
yeah.
they did remind me which version it was that had the
Sega
rendered
CD
FMV.
Sega CD and 3DO and
3DO.
CDI. Yeah, it has the full. Which this is not the flashback episode, but it annoys me so much that he did it because flashback was the CD game that's on a cartridge. So
that was the whole idea, right?
It's integral to that presentation, and then you make FMVs, terrible FMVs. So it's like, well, why would you do this?
That's exactly why those old rotoscoped scenes and like the anime scenes on PC Engine CD hold up so well, because they don't have that, 90s video compression dragging them down, right?
What's interesting though, Try, is that there were actually games that would sort of deploy almost FMV like cutscenes with like very simple shading to avoid that kind of compression artifact, and then you would end up with combining it with rotoscoping. So obviously, continuing from I guess Prince of Persia and all that, there was The Last Express, right?
Oh yeah,
which I believe was Jordan Mechner's
game,
where all the animations and all like this interactions with people, everything was fully rotoscoped. It looked absolutely gorgeous, I thought. There was also some really crazy stuff with what is it? There's this game called Wetlands. Y'all know Wetlands?
I sure do.
Oh man, Wetlands. Boy howdy. No, it's like this underwater sort of like FMV based game, but they have a ton of these like animated scenes that actually look really, really cool, where it's like sort of flat shaded characters that are drawn out and they move so realistically because it's all shot with rotoscoping. And as a result, unlike a lot of FMV at the time, this actually holds up super well just in terms of like making a nice visual impression. So I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
John, speaking of FMV, something I wanted to bring up was something I actually played very recently, just a couple months ago. Parasite Eve 2 has this scene in the very beginning of the game where you're kind of outside this building that you go into for the first level. And
right.
You've got like, of course, Aya, your main character, and a couple of police officers standing around that you can interact with. And as you move through this scene, it's a pre-rendered background like any other scene in the game, except it moves frame by frame as you move through the scene. If you stop, the motion forward stops. If you move backwards, it goes backwards. I'm assuming it's probably not streaming in the same way an FMV normally would, but a lot of PS1 games and other games in that era did things where the FMV would start while your polygon characters are still on screen, but then that FMV is kind of going to move away from your control. But here you can freely move back and forth, and it looks shockingly clean. It looks much better than like most FMV. It runs pretty smoothly. It's just a really impressive graphical flourish, and you don't see a lot of stuff like that. This blew my mind when I was playing it back in September.
I think John and I have played a game that has made us kind of accustomed to that effect, though. Do you know what I'm thinking of, John?
I don't know.
What?
I was going to
Mega Race. Mega Race 2.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, Mega Race, of course. Yeah, no, there was actually a couple things I wanted to chime in with on this. First of all, I will say this technique wasn't actually new at the time, but I am curious how they achieved this on the PlayStation. I do wonder if it's somehow something related to the fact that the PlayStation's video codec is based on motion JPEG, and they're somehow able to like read back individual frames forward and back.
The very beginning of the game kind of opens with this sequence where it has these targets pop up like in a police shooting range, training ground. And those kind of go in and out a lot more smoothly and without any hitching like you typically get with changing pre-rendered backgrounds or FMV, going in and out FMV. So I think they're kind of loading things into memory in like a very smooth way. I really don't know how they're doing it, but yeah, it's done in a way that seems atypical from typical FMV. I'd love to know more about it because it's done a lot better than most things like that I've seen done on PS1.
So obviously this has existed in the PC. What Audi would mention, Mega Race is an example. It's actually shipped on other consoles as well, including the Sega CD, the 3DO. The first Mega Race essentially used sprites for the cars, but the backgrounds were entirely 3D rendered, and basically FMV that played off the disc directly. But the way it worked was that depending on the speed of travel, the FMV playback speed would change. So you'd actually move slower or faster, and it would actually change the speed of the video. Which, cool enough. It was, early 90s. It was a very early CD-ROM game. That was cool by itself.
It's like those Tony steering wheel thingies. Like,
a little bit, yeah. Exactly. It's kind of like that. But then Mega Race 2 comes along. Yeah. And this is a later game. And not only is it higher resolution, not only are the cars now polygons, but they're able to do video that includes seamless branching paths and much smoother, motion speed changing, as well as the option to drive backwards.
That's insane.
Which is insane.
I can't believe that. It's just a video. But I can't believe that they went through the trouble of creating reverse scenes. That's insane.
I used to think back in, the 90s when I was first exposed to FMV and stuff, I used to think game graphics couldn't get that good. It would never happen. And so I was like, well, what if you could just make a game where every possible frame of action that could happen in that game was it's just rendered. I bet what if you had a bigger storage? Obviously that's completely unfeasible. But at the time I was like, is that how we get to FMV quality graphics? And
that kind of makes me think of the Capcom game Fox Hunt, where it's a FMV game. And you walk around and there's a separate video stream or sequence for turning every way in a room. It's neat.
That was actually a very common practice on the PC, right? But there was another technique that I want to bring up related to this in a second, though, because before I talk about that, I want to mention the granddaddy for a lot of the stuff that you mentioned. It's Killer Instinct.
Oh, yeah.
Killer Instinct, very specifically, its whole shtick was using FMV-based backgrounds.
Arcade versions.
Scroll
specifically.
Arcade version, only the arcade version. It could scroll left and right at 60 frames per second, and every frame was a different frame for that video background. And so it really looked and moved like a real 3D background, but it was actually just a video. The thing there, though, is they had much more powerful hardware, and it was read from a hard drive.
Yeah.
So it was not an optical media-based system, which probably made things a lot easier in terms of dealing with the data. But either way, the result was cool. But the thing I mentioned that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if you guys have any experience with this, but it's QuickTime VR and other related sort of technologies.
No.
When I say QuickTime VR, does anybody know what that is?
QuickTime VR?
Yes.
Like a VR plug-in for QuickTime?
Let me explain it then. So back in the day, you had games like Myst, right? Mm-hmm. Myst is a game that used QuickTime, the video format, to integrate characters into pre-rendered stills, right? Yeah. But Apple's QuickTime development continued from there, and they had something called QuickTime VR. And the idea was that you could create a 360-degree rotatable video that the player could freely move around in. So, let's say you're playing Myst, right? Just as an example, and I think Myst 3 did this.
Myst 3 and 4 do let you look freely around.
But there was a lot of earlier games as well on the PC where the idea was you click to a hot point, like in Myst, but now you use the mouse to freely look like mouse look around the scene. But what you're looking at is a video. So you actually see video moving objects and moving stuff, but you can actually rotate freely. So they made this work for these games. Sometimes they would even include interstitial videos between the hot points. Sometimes it would just click to the next hot point. But either way, it really was a perfect thing for this short era where you had Myst likes as a very popular genre of game.
That's interesting because, my closest point of reference is Myst 3 and 4. But when I first played those, like that was before I'd ever tried like a VR headset or anything like that, unless you count the Virtual Boy. But it almost creates this feeling of like, I feel like I am here. Like it just like filled in my imagination and my peripheral vision of like looking around in this space just simply by moving the mouse around. It really is a strangely compelling effect.
Exactly, right? And it is kind of like, spiritually speaking, this is what like Google Earth is kind of like, or like Google Maps with the Street View. That's kind of what this has become in a way, but it's less, there's no motion in Google Street View or anything. Whereas back here, like the games would still be able to have motion actively playing while using the QuickTime VR function. And so, again, this genre of games didn't last that long, but you know, this idea of just walking around in a first-person viewpoint and clicking on things, like the original Myst, while very popular, it was completely static. You'd click to another direction or forward, and it would just go to the next image. Seventh Guest shipped around similar times, and that tried to solve it by making every time you click a direction, it would play a video of the camera moving, which becomes very tedious. So this QuickTime VR and whatever else it's called beyond that, it was kind of a great solution to that problem, where it let you look around in 3D while preserving the detail you would expect from a pre-rendered game at the time. And then once we went full 3D, obviously it was no longer necessary. But this actually moves nicely into another topic that Coury mentioned here, and it's used in a very different way. Specifically, Blazing Star for the Neo Geo, the level 2 background. If anybody's played Blazing Star in the Neo Geo, you probably know what I'm talking about, right, Coury?
Yeah, so that was the first thing I thought about when we were talking about this subject, where the background on level 2 just is so expansive, it goes back so far, and it almost looks like video, and it's 3D, and at first I thought it was line scrolling, but upon further research, I found out, thanks to a channel called White Pointer Gaming, which is great for this kind of subject. There's a lot of videos on that channel that are talking about techniques in classic games that are still impressive. And I found out that it's sprite tiles. So that makes sense in that they really only have to create like one animation, right? One animation of each column, because it just repeats and repeats forever. It's stunning, and I think it holds up so well. And it's the first time I saw it, my jaw dropped.
It was on the floor.
My jaw still drops every time I'm reminded of its existence.
Yeah.
And I guess what's impressive about it is that, so it does look like an FMV at first, but it is obviously, you know, still just using the sprite tiles that Neo Geo has. But I guess they have enough space on the mask ROM chips there that they're able to store all those individual frames in such a way and then tile them just right to give the illusion of a constantly moving background that updates every single frame at 60 frames per second, which is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, so it makes it a bit repetitive, but it doesn't, that part doesn't last for that long, you know. So it's just kind of a trick that catches your eye.
I feel like we saw this stuff again with things like Zoldner X2, if you recall, and probably even Zoldner X to some, I can't remember, but like those games use FMV stuff. But then a more retro thing that came to mind was actually the Iridian 3D games on GBA from Shinen, which also used this trick of sort of simulating fake 3D using pre-rendered assets in a way that looks super smooth.
I mean, you can go further back to the Kataki's 3D prototype.
Oh, right.
On Game Boy Color, which uses the same technique, which is just insane.
Really?
So Kataki's was like a C64 Factor 5 game. And our friend Andreas Escher and I think Matsuke worked on it too. But it might there's at least a few of them that worked on it from the Factor 5 days. And it is basically just like Iridium, but it's on Game Boy Color and uses the Katakis universe instead. So it's sort of connected to Rendering Ranger R2. Used the same ship design and stuff. So there's some sort of connection here between all these games.
Yeah, but Iridian is kind of nice because the two games kind of explore different 3D perspectives. The first one is more like behind the ship, and there's a little bit of motion in the screen as like you move the ship to the corner that increases that feel of like actually being in a 3D space. There's even levels with like, you know, the ocean beneath you and stuff. And it really is a convincing effect, but they're just making it so that this very short series of pre-rendered frames is cleanly loopable as you continue moving forward. And then the second game has more of like kind of an overhead but tilted perspective, but using a very similar technique. It's the first one in some ways is probably more impressive, more convincingly 3D, but the second one might be maybe a little more of a playable viewpoint.
Right. Well, the first one's called Iridium 3D for a reason.
But they both, they both use a similar background technique to what you see in Blazing Star on Neo Geo.
So keeping with this theme, then there's two or three more retro style topics to touch before we get to the newer technology, right? And one of them is something Coury mentioned here, and in a way it actually feels very similar to what we've been talking about with this video stuff, and it's the first person dungeons in Phantasy Star 1 on the Sega Master System, because when you see it moving, it does truly give you the illusion of wandering through a 3D space, but in reality it's anything but.
Yeah, it's just background layers, right? Or no, it's not background layers. It's
if you watch a video of it, you'll notice like the black lines, like basically it's like alternating between frames. So they're just like swapping between different, like, I guess, Master System background tiles to give the effect, if I had to guess. And they have enough of these different variants that they're able to sort of like quickly swap between them to create that illusion.
Yeah.
And like, so there's nothing actually 3D rendered. I guess the logic then would come about directional and which screens to pull when and all that kind of stuff. But the end result is that it does look like a 3D dungeon.
Yeah, it really made the game feel more advanced than, you know, the headliner NES and Famicom RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, right? Like it makes that game stand out a lot among its 8-bit peers. If I'm remembering correctly, is that a Yu Suzuki program?
Yeah, Yuji Naka.
Thing? Yuji Naka. Okay.
You know, I whatever. I mean, say what you will about him now, but I mean, he was brilliant with working with that.
Absolutely.
And then compressing those down to fit on the cartridge. I read something about on Shmuffulations about how when he first created them, they were moving so fast because they weren't compressed, and it was making people sick.
Right.
So by compressing it, it had a dual functionality of saving space, but also slowing things down, so that, you know, it works so much better, I think, when it's slower.
Up to this point, then, we've talked a lot about replicating more advanced visuals using simple technology, as well as creating 3D depth in games that have no actual 3D graphics at all. But there's still a few other sort of 16-bit style topics related to this that we could discuss. For instance, you actually mentioned something about golf games, and you specifically mentioned Jack Nicholson's
Jack Nicholas.
Jack Nicholas, not Nicholson.
Jack younger brother.
Jack Nicholson's Turbo Golf,
I would totally play Jack Nicholson's golf, man. That would be great.
Imagine the title screen.
Well,
somebody should make that with a digitized Jack Nicholson on the title screen. I would play that.
Well, the only reason I was thinking of this recently was because I recently did a video about the Turbo Nanza, and that is a game that uses the Turbo Nanza. It's a mod for TurboGrafx that has RGB and S video, and I was mostly focused on the S video because it has the composite palette. But that's besides the point. This is a game that runs in multiple horizontal resolutions, so it was actually a good test game for some of the things I was doing with the RetroTink 4K in the video. But I was thinking of it just because Coury streamed it not that long before I was working on that video. And it does a thing that you see a lot of golf games do in that era that, don't get me wrong, this is not really a particularly great looking game. It actually maybe looks kind of bad, but a lot of golf games do this thing where it just kind of blows my mind that, you've got your tee off point, you've got the hole you're going for, that ball could land anywhere on that course. But then you have that behind the player viewpoint, no matter where the ball lands, and it slowly renders that, at least in Jack Nicklaus Golf, it slowly renders that into, the sand traps are where they should be, the lakes are where they should be, the trees are where they should be, the green is where it should be, and these aren't backgrounds that are just like stored on the cart. Like it's taking into account where the ball landed and rendering that viewpoint. I believe, again, this isn't, I'm more into like 3D golf games, like cartoony 3D golf games like Mario Golf on N64, Hot Shots on PSP. So I don't have a lot of experience with this, but every time I see this, I'm like, they're rendering a viewpoint live in these old golf games.
This isn't like 16-bit though, but like you can see the same effect on leaderboard on C64. So it's like an old technique used in a lot of golf games.
NES Open does it too, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, and the complexity of this varied per game, obviously. The big example on PC was stuff like Lynx 386 Pro, Lynx LS in 1997, where it's these tile-based renderers that are able to draw surprisingly realistic environments, but because you're not actually needing to render it all in real time, the computer has enough time to draw that screen. And depending on the amount of processing power you'd have, it actually could take more or less time. Console games then could do a mix. Sometimes you could do it 3D. Sometimes it would literally just be like a rasterized, like 2D kind of screenshot. But the idea is like, instead of doing real-time 3D rendering where you have to update the frame like every X number of milliseconds, this was like, well, we can dedicate like multiple seconds to drawing a single frame. So it's basically a way to get more complex 3D visuals than you could realistically get in real time. But it actually looks all right in golf games. But you mentioning the golf games stirred my memory and reminded me of another game that I love that it's from the Twinsons series, the Little Big Adventure series. It's the second game, Twinsons Odyssey. So in the interiors, like the first game, you have pre-rendered isometric views, right? But the overworld in that game is completely done in 3D. It's like a full 3D engine, except for it only updates the frame when you reach the edge of that specific frame, and then it basically switches to a new angle. But on a fast enough PC, if you just keep tapping the reset view button, you can actually almost get the thing moving in real time around you, because it is just drawing a new frame every time the camera changes. So functionally, it works like a pre-rendered background game where you have a polygon character running around on an angled styled background, but they're all being drawn by the computer rather than like pre-rendered.
Yeah, those backgrounds are not stored on the disk or the computer. That's kind of wild, right?
It was cool. It was a way to get more detailed, full 640 by 480 backgrounds in 3D before computers could realistically do that with a real-time 3D camera. So, like, I could play that game on my 486 still, because it was, it had enough processing time to like render a new frame. And I admit, it's a very cool remnant of that era. It makes me wonder, what if that approach were used today? So hear me out, guys. Check this out. What if you had, like, say, a Resident Evil game with pre-rendered looking backgrounds, like Resident Evil Remake or something, or the classic ones, but you deployed path tracing and a really demanding rendering feature that you can't really do at a smooth frame rate, but these consoles could still probably generate it fast enough to be able to do like a single frame when you hit the edge of the scene.
I believe the second game just came out. There's they're not high end technologically, but I believe they run Unreal Engine, the Tormented Souls games. they have a lot of Resident Evil style static perspectives, but everything is drawn in 3D. But so that idea has been replicated in the indie space, but I think you've got the right idea here. What if you did make it, rendered in a way that's faster than you could do in real time? And maybe you could overlay some sort of baked effects like, candle flickering on top or something like that, that would run at 60 FPS, but the actual background with some of that, those path tracing features, that's a really clever idea. Let's submit that to Capcom, please.
I feel like that's very relevant to everything we've just been discussing.
I would love to do an episode someday talking about pre-rendered backgrounds, because that's very much a lost art. I mean, you mentioned Resident Evil 1 Remake. I mean, that's the apex of the art form.
That's the best it ever got. Talking about pre-renders, there's a couple I wanted to note before we move on. That the effect is sort of lost today because we upscale them and they're too sharp and too clean. But like Fair Effect, when I first played that, the fact that it was like FMV pre-rendered backgrounds, when I played it on the TV back in the day, I was stunned by how great that looked, how dynamic that whole experience was. And they were just re-released, and the games are still fairly okay. But that effect is so lost because there's such a difference between the rendering of the model and then the noise and the resolution of the backgrounds. But when you played on CRT, man, it was insane. It was so good.
I mean, we could probably talk forever about the flat shading of characters from that generation.
Oh my gosh!
Flat shading, yeah.
Mega Man Legends and the way that the faces are drawn perspective correct to the camera.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's also one for PS2 that John and I played called Face Paradox, which is interesting when it comes to pre-rendering, because they pre-rendered every angle cinematically, in the sense that like whenever it changed the camera angle, they had pre-rendered a background that the character was standing in front of from like various directions. So like everything looked really good, but it was an individual render per scene, which was really interesting.
That's enough!
There's actually a couple more things to mention before we move on to the real post-2000 era of graphics. And first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention large-scale sprite scaling. What do I mean? Look at a game like Galaxy Force 2. This is a game that you play, and it still sticks with me because they're building out full-on environments out of sprites. And you're moving around in 3D, flying through it rapidly, but the world around you is just a bunch of 2D sprites, and it's extremely impressive and smooth to behold in a way that really, really surprised me. Obviously, this comes from all the super scalar stuff Sega have been doing beforehand, right? Super Thunderblade, or I guess regular Thunderblade, the super version, not so much. They also did this thing where they would stack sprites overhead to give this impression of like perspective on the buildings. So you're just parallaxing them at different rates to give this look that, hey, it's actually like a 3D structure.
It was mainly in arcade games, I mean, where you'd see this. The one I like to think of is like Alien 3 The Gun is like a good...
Oh, yeah,
that's a great one.
Oh, yeah.
Or the first Jurassic Park game from Sega, the light gun shooter.
Speaking to John's point,
Taito's Gunbuster was also another good one. I did a video on that where it's a prototype, like a first-person shooter moving around in 3D, but it's all built from sprites.
Speaking to your point, though, John, when talking about the sprite scaling stuff, one that I feel like never gets talked about enough is Soulstar on Sega CD.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
that game looks insane.
Just insane for, scaling on Sega CD is, when you get it, it's so satisfying. And I think that's...
Yeah.
It doesn't play the greatest. I think that's why people kind of overlook it a little bit.
It's very mean. That game is very mean.
It's very British difficult. It's a Brit game.
It's very British.
But it is fantastic looking, and it does a lot of those things. And it creates a sense of scale that you generally don't get on that console too much.
There's a couple other things, though, specifically Audi, that you wanted to mention. The first one is simply titled Massive Explosions in Vulcan.
It's just when utilizing scaling in Mode 7 and such on Super Nintendo. Like, if you look at Turtles in Time, and especially Vulcan, like, when you beat that first boss, it's just like, it fills the entire screen with just pixel goodness. It's just so satisfying to look at that. It's nothing super impressive, really. They're just utilizing a very simple mode in the hardware, but like the effect of it, though, is just bombastic.
Big crunchy pixels. If it gets that big, like I have to pause, like I literally pause the game and just like bask in the glory of those chunky pixels.
That's also your fetish.
On the Genesis, also, El Viento does it. But it's not, not
it's
scaled.
not,
Those are probably just individual frames,
that's
right?
straight. Yes, that's straight up. And it's
there,
cool,
there's
though. I like El Viento for just that.
There are a few things on the Genesis where you know they're not doing like scaling in the same way a Super Nintendo could or an arcade game could, but they chose to just make it chunky pixels anyway. And it's like, I don't know why they did that, but I appreciate it.
Because it looks awesome.
It looks stupid. Like they probably should have done it another way, but I like it.
Okay, so the last thing from this era is the opposite of chunky pixels. And this is one I've seen myself, and I agree with you, Audie. It's simply high-resolution magic on the PC-98.
Yeah, I mean...
And this actually applies to all these old Japanese computers, I would say.
They had to render higher res for kanji and symbols. So you had that kind of byproduct of it by having also high-resolution images. And they use a lot of dithering to create a lot of sense of like shadows and deeper colors. But like you look at something like Possessioneer or Uno, like you're looking at those games and the introductions, it's just insane. It's poetry in motion, really.
Or poetry and still.
Well, that depends. You know, something like Uno is slightly animated. And Desire, Eve Burster, those games too. It's just... It's so... There's nothing... Again, it's not that they're doing something revolutionary or like technically impossible, because this is very much part of the system. But what you get, though, is just some of the greatest pixel art you've ever seen. And it doesn't get seen enough because of the language barrier. But there's probably an episode in the future of either this podcast or DF Retro where we do a deep dive on PC-98.
So one thing to really note about this is like when you see it on a proper CRT of that era, the difference is so different from like viewing it on a modern screen. Like it really is super beautiful looking. One of my favorite looking things from that era. And yes, this is something I like to dive more into at some point in the future on the channel.
Though I will say that PC-98 does actually scale up pretty well sharp though.
Sure. But you lose... A lot of the games that relied heavily on dithering and such really benefit from those specific CRTs versus playing it on a modern screen. But either way, that pretty much covers a lot of the things that we found impressive from the pre-2000 era. But there's a lot more that happened in the world of video games visually after that, and we have some examples of those, which we'll get to in just a moment. With the turn of the century, new technologies became available and video game graphics evolved. And I was there to witness it for myself. I would definitely agree with this. And there was some amazing stuff happening during this era. And one of the key areas where I think more powerful hardware came in handy was simulating natural phenomena. For instance, water. I've done an episode on water before on DF Retro, but I feel like it's something that really deserves mention here because the depiction of rain, water, splashing, all of these different effects, like majorly improved this generation. So obviously the first one that comes to mind is Metal Gear Solid 2, the rain effects in that game. This is beyond anything we'd ever seen at that point. Not only did they do an awesome job with the rain simulation, with all the individual droplets whipping around, affected by like a virtual wind simulation, they also spent time drawing individual droplets that would form on the game's camera lens, the virtual lens, that would sort of like refract the scene around it realistically and then dribble down the fake lens. You had reflective surfaces like the deck of the tanker, which was technically just mirroring the scene below and then applying a surface effect to make it look like a reflection. There was actually pools of water later in the game that relied heavily on this mix of particles and other techniques to create something that looked awesome.
There's seagull poo.
There's seagull poo, of course. They even found time to do some specular highlights off the surface of water by drawing a generic sort of like texture below the surface of the water and then parallaxing them to give the impression of the sun reflecting off the surface. So like Kojima Productions spent so much time making the water in that game just look cool, and I really appreciate that. But that's not the only one. There was so many other examples, and a lot of them took a very different approach. For instance, one of my favorites actually is Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance.
The water in that.
Yeah,
I
could be
talk
this
about
entire
the water.
episode.
Looks like a fine jelly, really.
Yeah, it's something.
I could talk about the water in that game all day.
well, thankfully we have hours and hours to spare. Let's go. The rest of the
I mean-
podcast is all Dark Alliance
3
water
hours of
time.
PS2 was long.
I mean, so like, not only is the water in Dark Alliance 2 or Dark Alliance 1 and 2 incredible looking, you run through the pool of water and it just leaves this really cool looking ripple behind you, but other enemies, other players can intersect with that water and it reacts in real time, and it's doing all of these like calculations while running the game at 60 frames per second and having arguably maybe like the best image quality on PS2. Like it's insanely good looking.
It really is. Like, I still don't know how they managed to pull this off, this water simulation, but it's this very dense polygon mesh with like lighting applied to it to give it that
is it a
specular
polygon?
sheen.
Like it's
I think it is.
really, because I always assumed they were doing something just with like a texture somehow.
I think
Wow.
it's actually really 3D.
That would be dense polygons. Man, it looks so good.
Around this time, we also had Wave Race Blue Storm, which of course goes back to Wave Race 64, which is a game we didn't mention yet that does come from the pre-2000 era. And I know, Tri, you're a big fan of the way it looks, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and not just the way it looks. Like, I think Wave Race 64 really married, like, the idea of these wave physics. And I don't think any game other than Wave Race 64 has really captured just the pure fun of bouncing off of those waves and how they feel. Like, they really tuned the physics to fun in Wave Race 64 in a way that I've personally never seen replicated. Wave Race Blue Storm and some other games come close, but it's the thing that's most insane to me about Wave Race 64 is that it happened so early on the N64 life cycle. It's incredible to me that the game exists doing what it did. And it's something that you don't see a lot of games do, is having that real interaction with wave physics today.
No, it's not that common of a thing. You're right. But the way it advanced, so Wave Race 64 is super cool, and the way it ties into the gameplay is awesome. But if you actually look closely at it, you realize it's just a small mesh that follows the player around, right?
Right.
If you view this in high resolution on an emulator, you can see, the water cuts off just like a few meters from the player.
Yeah.
It's just that with the lower resolution in 64, it all blends together and gives you this impression that you're on the surface of water. But it is pretty simple, which is why. So now Wave Race Blue Storm, I don't think plays nearly as well.
No,
it doesn't do as much
it's
with
good
the waves,
but it's good.
It's still a good game, and it does evolve that technique. So now you actually do have a much larger body of water, and this one is still a polygon mesh. So you do interact with it similarly. It doesn't look quite as good as something like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, but it's also down with a different perspective and a different type of game, right? So it's challenging. Right. But what they do in this one that's so interesting is that this is a game that uses what would become a very common technique that generation that I still love, render to texture, where the texture surface is defined by the results from a separate camera. So you imagine there's like this like capture camera placed in the scene that's designed to correctly reflect the environment from the specific point of view that the player is currently viewing the game from. So it's essentially duplicating the surrounding graphics as a texture on the water surface, and that's how it creates reflections.
So,
right?
John, would that be similar to something like, I know when you and I did a Let's Play of the GoldenEye remake, I played the Wii version, you played the PS3 version. We were very stunned to see that the Wii version has an actual functional reflection of Daniel Craig in the facility bathroom mirrors, and PS3 did not, because PS3 is trying to do so many more advanced graphics techniques, and things like that render to texture that you mentioned and planar reflection started to fall to the wayside to make room for other techniques. And I feel like something is kind of lost there. Like I think some of the old school reflections can really surprise you, because you often miss some of the effects that they did unless you've got ray tracing.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right in that. So I don't think that was the render to texture feature. I don't remember. But you're right. There was also planar reflections at the time, which is where they would essentially sort of duplicate. You're essentially rendering the geometry twice inside the reflection to create this. I guess it is technically still kind of a render to texture technique, though. But it does. You do get kind of different results. I was thinking more as well, like just not even water, but like the reflections in, like, say, Gran Turismo 3, which were really impressive at the time, where it's essentially like a capture. It's capturing this and like putting it into a spherical. It's like a spherical map that's then mapped onto the car, and it's able to play back the reflection from this camera across the surface of the paint to give you the impression of reflecting the scene. All these sorts of techniques became very popular during this era. I think probably the best example of it, for my money, is still Half-Life 2. The water reflections in Half-Life 2 are just unbelievable. Not just the reflections themselves, but the way they tried to simulate like the depth of water itself, the Fresnel effect on the surface, as well as like, the actual like caustics. Well, sort of. It was more like the depth of, like, if you're looking at shallow water, you can see directly into it. But if it's deeper, it actually has like this proper like atmospherics within that gives it like this thickness to it that looked super, super cool at the time. All of that kind of stuff is just something that was awesome. And that generation really, really allowed it to do stuff with water that we hadn't seen before. Another one I want to mention on that front, actually, and I know not everybody loves it, but Wave Rally for PlayStation 2 does the same type of water rendering as Wave Race Blue Storm. But
you can't stop bringing that game up, can you?
Yeah, because
I won't like it just because you mentioned it.
Yeah,
it's good tech though. It's not a great game,
convinced
but
me to buy it at one point.
I convinced me to buy it too, and then I played it.
I decided not to, and I bought Splashdown Rides Gone Wild instead.
Okay, Splashdown actually has cool water as well.
Yeah, that's a
geometric.
Yeah,
and that game's wild.
You know what, John?
It?
I mean, that game is doing insane stuff with like streaming in like an entirely different track. Like you like travel into like an alternate reality or the future or something like during the tracks on that game. Like that's pretty impressive for PS2.
All before you needed a Gen 5 SSD to do it, right?
That's right.
Splashdown.
So Splashdown, Rides Gone Wild. I mean, technically SSX also kind of did the whole like streaming in lots of level data, right? As you're going down the slope, you have these super long levels. That stuff was really cool as well. So, but yeah, water was a big thing during that generation. It did continue to evolve to a degree. I actually think it kind of got worse during the SSR era.
Agreed.
But we did have some cool PS3 era water. Like there was the game Warhawk, if you remember, from Sony, which was a multiplayer sort of reboot of the PS1 game.
Right.
But that game had some very beautiful water effects that a lot of people kind of overlooked because of the type of game it was, I guess. But that was something I always loved, and that was full polygon waves and nice reflections, and nothing like the SSR stuff, which wasn't really even feasible until like the PS4 generation, by and large.
Have
Have your access codes been changed?
Yeah, what's with all the Marines?
Not sure.
Beyond water, though, there's other effects that I think that are important, such as shadows. And there's many ways to do shadows, but back then, the modern approach was just to use shadow maps, which is like textures. This wasn't really feasible yet, by and large. It just couldn't be done. So typically in games, you would like create some sort of like approximate shadow that would sit specifically under dynamic characters and the like, and it could look okay, but it was never that great. But eventually we started to get some more experiments with doing real-time shadows with a higher quality. And a lot of times it involves stencil shadows. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind is Doom 3 for me. This was shown off at Macworld, I think in like 2001, perhaps, by John Carmack, and the game would ship in 2004. And they used these like beautiful stencil shadows to essentially extrude the geometry, a shadow of the geometry out. So you could get perfect self shadows. So like if your hand was in front of a light, you would see a shadow on the face, but it also cast shadows across the environment. So it was very, very unified looking. And it could also cast this for environment geometry as well. So everything cast shadows.
And very sharp as well compared to early shadow maps. That's the key.
Well, so yes, you get per pixel detail. So every little polygon edge was perfectly represented in these. Of course, they looked way sharper and much darker and less realistic than what actual shadows look like. But stylistically, for specific types of visuals, it's a really, really cool effect. But as it turns out, it's something that was also done years earlier in games like Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3 on the PlayStation 2, which the PS2 could do this type of shadow. But what they did that was really cool here was they would actually send that out to a separate sort of render target sort of thing, although I don't know if they would have called it that back then, and apply like a filter to it to sort of blur it out and then reintegrate that with the scene, which would then create the illusion of soft shadows. So you had full shadows that were unified for the environment and the characters that were completely like soft and smooth rather than like super hard edged. And they looked awesome.
See, I miss stuff like this because I hate that it's 2025 and I still am sometimes playing games with like obviously jagged shadows.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in a lot of ways the shadows produced during that era look more visually, aesthetically pleasing than some of the nasty shadow maps we have had in modern games. Although I think we're at a pretty good point now.
Yeah, still problems on the Switch side and the handheld side.
Sure, definitely.
And indie games oftentimes, have pretty simple shadow maps.
Interestingly, even Dreamcast could do these like shadow volumes. You could have super sharp shadows in some things as well. It was a pretty ubiquitous technique, but still doing full global stencil shadows across the entire game environment was not cheap. Silent Hill could do it because the environments were fairly small. And then we had stuff like the Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay on Xbox, which actually did it. And that's probably one of the first games ever with dynamic resolution scaling, because it would actually become quite chunky in heavy scenes. But they actually managed to reproduce Doom 3 style shadows in the Xbox. And in fact, Doom 3 itself was ported to Xbox, though simplified. But the one that suffered, actually, I have to mention, is Halo 2, if you remember, was initially being developed with something they called P-Stencil, which was indeed stencil shadows. And in fact, the very first demo shown with him ejecting from the space station was shown with those enabled. And unfortunately for Halo 2, it seems like all of the game's like art, textures, normal maps, all of it was kind of designed as if it were being made for stencil shadows. And then when they had to drop that feature, it made the whole game look really kind of flat and ugly. So in many ways, Halo 2 looks a lot worse than Halo 1 because they were pushing into almost next generation territory because they're trying to do huge scale maps, but with this advanced unified shadows. And it just seemingly wasn't possible. And it kind of suffered.
That's so interesting because it ties into, stuff that you talk about all the time with modern games with, well, the game has been arted with ray tracing in mind, and, it's just not going to work if you strip that away.
Without a fallback. So, yeah. So that's the thing, though. But stencil shadows, really, really cool stuff. But, of course, along those lines, I mentioned Silent Hill, right, Coury? And
oh, yeah.
That you jotted down this, and I fully agree. It's just the character models in Silent Hill 3 on PlayStation 2.
Yeah, these character models are so detailed, and especially coming off of, they looked good in 2, but then they're all real time in 3. Right? I think of that opening scene, with Heather having her head down and the light coming in from the windows. And just seeing that the first time, I was like, holy cow, how is this even on this system?
Possible.
But then there was, I remember for the longest time, it was a meme of the character Douglas, like saying something.
Shaking his head or whatever.
And it's so smooth and lifelike that it's incredible. And, you said they were able to do this probably because the size of the environments were not that big. It really just goes to show how good Team Silent was on that hardware. And the fact that they came out with that game so close after doing Silent Hill 2, they just kept on rolling.
I know, man. That it's a technical, just incredible achievement. Unbelievable. And yeah, that gif of Douglas frequented internet message boards and social media for like a decade after that.
Yeah.
Like every time you'd be seeing new PS3 and 360 games coming out with character models that looked a lot worse than that, and be like, oh, here's Douglas. And part of that is down to like they would very specifically craft their models to be shown in these scenes, where I think some of the bigger games would be trying to do like cutscenes within the context of these bigger, larger games. So you couldn't necessarily craft each scene to match the best fidelity you would want. Like if you look at the document of Metal Gear Solid 2, you realize, oh yeah, all the cutscenes are broken up into these little tiny areas that are all bespoke and placed around inside of a floating empty map space. And they're all detailed very specifically just for the camera angle, which interestingly is actually kind of how Hollywood works. If you look at what they do with CGI and CGI sets, like things will be super detailed, but only from the viewpoint that you're going to be seeing it from. And then if you actually were to go into the model, you'd be like, oh wait, there's actually a lot of like sacrifices and just like lack of detail if you look too deep. And it's quite funny. I mean, yeah, Silent Hill 3 among the best of that generation. But, we saw a lot of games with significantly better character models than anything that had been seen on the PlayStation era, right? Like back then in the 90s, characters were extremely blocky. A lot of textures had to fill in detail, but finally that generation with PS2 and beyond,
mitten
you
hands.
were getting like exactly, or even I think back to Dreamcast. They didn't look nearly as good in game, but there's head demos for Shenmue that were produced,
the Shenmue passport thing.
Yeah, like that obviously
that,
it doesn't represent what you see in game, like not even close. But the rendering quality was insane for the time.
Yeah,
right.
But it's only like very specifically rendering like a close up of their upper heads and upper torsos. So, but man, I was blown away when I first saw that. That was in a store. They were showing that off in a store kiosk. That the Shenmue passport after it released, and I remember seeing it and just like, damn, I need this game.
Exactly. Absolutely. So, beyond that though, something you mentioned here, and this actually can apply to multiple things. You said fur shading in Star Fox Adventures, DK Jungle Beat, etc. But that also kind of ties into the other shell texture effects like grass.
Yeah, well, Star Fox Adventures does that with grass as well. It's 60 frames per second.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X on Xbox, as well as some of the subsequent Xbox
grass
versions of the Tony Hawk games. They did the same thing on all the grass areas. They used shell texture to give it that 3D grass.
I feel like, yes, the way they do that shell texture effect does kind of work best in more cartoonish kinds of games like Star Fox, Donkey Kong, Super Mario. I see I wrote Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Galaxy. That's what I meant to write here. Super Mario Galaxy, it does work really well in kind of cartoonish games and, with lots of sort of round, smooth shapes. So I wonder if that's why it really took so long for kind of animal creatures to look quite as fuzzy in more kind of realistic graphics games. Because like still to this day, you'll see like, just, a wolf in the forest or something in a semi-realistic game, and you look up close at it and you're like, oh, it's just kind of got a nasty texture on it. A really interesting example too is Viva Pinata, which that game actually runs in high resolution if you play it backwards compatible on Series X. You've got kind of all that, kind of flaky, papery pinata type material on both the characters and the grass. And it's kind of crazy how perfectly that scales up to 4K or near 4K, whatever the resolution of that is when you play it backwards compatible. It's a technique that holds up. It scales well.
So thinking of depth along those lines of grass, this also was when we started to get the era of like parallax mapping. We saw it in stuff like Fear. I believe Far Cry used some, but the one that really tickled my fancy was the launch of Xbox 360, where both Cameo and Perfect Dark Zero applied this to textures, which actually gave them real, like, visible depth. So even though it was a flat texture, it looked like 3D bricks or 3D stones or whatever it was, right? And that's kind of an extension of this, like, shell texture technique. Not the same technique, but it's the same idea of, like, extruding something to using a flat, like, asset to create something that looks three-dimensional.
And of course, you can see it
Zero is, like, the best example of that. Like when you look at like the wet stone walls on Perfect Dark Zero,
it was insane at the time.
Yeah, well, it's the best part of the game.
You can see it break down if you look at it like too oblique of an angle, but it people to this day still think of games like Cameo when they think of parallax occlusion maps, or even if they don't know what the technique is called, they're like, yeah, like Cameo had those like really like realistic looking bricks.
I agree. Yeah, that stuff was freaking awesome.
Still is. That's why we're talking about in this episode.
Yeah, exactly. It still is. Another effect, though, that I want to mention from this generation, and this ties into one that you mentioned as well, though there's more to it than that, heat haze effect. This is actually something that was really, really cool, and this became popular on PlayStation 2 first. The idea was that they were able to like sort of like distort the scene in such a way to give the illusion of like, well, a heat haze, right? Like if you look above a candle, you actually see the air distorting around it, and that does happen here. So like I remember stuff like Jak and Daxter, for instance, where all the torches were, you could see a little bit of that heat haze. Gran Turismo 3 used this all over the place, and replays especially, to simulate the appearance of hot tarmac. Yeah. So like when the camera would zoom in, you get that heat haze effect everywhere. And it was such that the PS2 was so good at doing this that they weren't actually able to replicate this on PlayStation 3. So
interesting.
Too bandwidth intensive for the hardware.
Right. It's using that crazy PS2 bandwidth versus like, I guess, pixel shaders would be how you would have done it later, right?
Yeah, that would have been one way.
I recall seeing something like this in Reckless.
Yeah, absolutely. The Xbox had it, of course. Reckless was just incredible with that. Yeah, that went nuts with all kinds of effects, including depth of field, which we talked a lot about last week. And it's beautiful on PlayStation 2, of course, and other systems at the time. Although, you mentioned Skyward Sword for the Wii, which took that same idea of doing depth of field and applied like a different take to it, right?
Right. I have no idea how it's actually done, but Skyward Sword, not the best Zelda game, but maybe the aesthetically best Zelda game. And
it's up there.
You have that in the distance, and they're probably doing this largely for like level of detail management as well. But they have this like very like splotchy, painterly sort of effect to the depth of field in Skyward Sword. And unfortunately, that's, if I recall correctly, that's one of those effects that kind of doesn't scale quite the way you remember it when you play it at high resolution, like say on the Switch version. The details are much smaller, whereas that kind of broader stroke effect is much more apparent. I'm actually playing right now. This is a game with a lot of performance issues, by the way, but I'm playing on the Switch 2, Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, and it has, in its distance, that's an Unreal Engine game. it has in the distance sort of a somewhat similar thing where distant objects look kind of painted. You do see this effect done in a few other games, but Skyward Sword is the first time I noticed it, and I think it really holds up.
Absolutely. It's very, very cool. And again, it's sort of a lens trick. And all of this just ties into this whole thing of like simulating natural phenomena, right? Like camera lenses simulating the heat haze from fire, or the way shadows work, fur, things like that.
Or artistic phenomena, as an
artistic phenomenon as well.
Skyward Sword, yeah.
Another thing though, actually, and it kind of kicked off a lot back in the 90s, but it really came into its own during this, is the simulation of like sunlight and lens flares during that generation. And the one I want to mention specifically is actually Halo Combat Evolved, where they had that little sun. They had that sun in the sky, right, beaming down on the map. And then you walk in front of a tree, which gets in front of the sun, and the way they draw it filtering through the leaves, it still looks awesome even today. I love that effect. It's so good. I
have to say, I'm always impressed too when I see lens flare in sprite-based games, because you really didn't see it very often. The one I always think of, there's some levels in the fourth Super Famicom Goemon game. You just don't see it very often. But yeah, Wave Race 64 was probably the game that made me first fall in love with lens flare.
Yeah. Wave Race and 1080.
Yeah.
Turok Dinosaur Hunter, lens flares everywhere.
And now we've peaked with banana-shaped lens flares and Donkey Kong Bonanza.
But what if you combined all the stuff, like crazy lighting, heat haze, like shadows, and you just brought it all together into this perfect mix, and you had to put it out in 2005? What would you get?
Bubsy 3D?
No. You get the lava room from Resident Evil 4.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God.
Similar enough.
Oh, man. I tell you what, like, this... I think the way that it glows, like, this was before bloom was overused, right? And the way that it's just got this intense glow, I think actually hides a lot of the flaws that you get with liquid effects in water and stuff in other games of the era, where you don't really notice as this stuff is like bubbling up into these spires of magma. Like, you don't perceive it as being flat textures and stuff like that so much. Every time I see lava in video games to this day, I'm just like, does it look as good as Resident Evil 4? And the answer is usually no, at least until I played Astrobot last year. Astrobot has some pretty good lava, but usually I'm like, man, it just, something about that intense glow and the way that it bubbles up, like, man, I cannot get enough of that lava room in RE4. It's one of the best looking things I've ever seen. And it's not in the remake.
No, I couldn't believe that. Like, why would they do this to us? And also, this is one where it really showed the muscle of GameCube, because this also wasn't in the PlayStation 2 version. The lava room was, but it didn't look like this.
Oh, I've never played that far into the PS2 version.
Oh.
And part of that, I think, so what the big trick that they're doing here seems to be, they're doing a lot with dynamic lights in this room. If you look at any of the dynamic objects, there's like a light sort of coming from each side, creating this like rim light effect on the character. So you have that with the overexposed lights and flames and everything, and it just winds up looking incredible for the time. And it still holds up today in a way that's like, and unfortunately, that freaking... The PS2 version, it doesn't look bad there or anything, but the lighting is way toned down, the intensity is toned down, which is kind of weird because we know PS2 could do those kind of overexposed high intensity lights.
Yeah, and I've never finished any of like the HD versions from that era. So I've never seen the lava room in those, but from what I've seen in videos, it's a little bit less intense. So maybe it's more based on how the PS2 version does it. But man, it's really striking, I think, on the GameCube and Wii in particular. And when I beat Resident Evil 5, the end of that game takes place in a volcano. I'm just like, man, what ain't as good as RE4 here.
Complete global saturation. But honestly, gents, I feel like we could go on and on here about all these effects, but it's been a fun conversation, sort of randomly bouncing around between all these different techniques and features. I think it's all to say that games look pretty cool, and there's a lot of cool technologies in them.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's still a lot of room to explore each of these things in a lot more detail in the future at some point. Maybe in a proper DF Retro, maybe I can continue the Water series. I don't know. But either way, it was a lot of fun talking about these effects with you guys today. But I'm going to toss one last one in here, and it's a wild one. I don't know if you guys are ready for this.
Okay.
The Holosseum from Sega.
Dude, I was thinking of that earlier.
Yeah, okay.
Dude,
Yeah.
so I play that.
Or like Time Traveler, right?
I've played it too. Both Time Traveler and the Holosseum arcade fighting game.
Yeah, people need to understand how incredible this was in person as a kid, right? Because it literally like projected it. It's like AR sort of. It's just a mirror, but like it looked like proper AR for me, and I couldn't believe like here they're coming up. Dude, the Holosseum, man, it's such a terrible game, but I loved it so bad. But I felt so lucky that I got to play it on actual cab as a kid.
May as well just mention Vector arcade games while we're at it. Vector Monitor arcade games. I mean, you can't fully replicate that experience without a real Vector Monitor, and that's why it still looks so incredible today when you play games like Star Wars Arcade and whatnot. You know, I believe Star Wars Arcade is Naoki Hori's favorite game of all time. Naoki Hori from M2.
Wow, that's wild. But you're right, and that was definitely leaning on the monitor technology. The Holosseum was kind of a trick. Like, did do this like holographic sort of projection thing, but if you actually look at the games running, they like in the Holosseum, for instance, they draw a second sprite below the main sprite that's as a reflection, and within the context of the actual machine, it does genuinely look like you have these like 3D things like standing up and then reflecting in the black glass below it, because the scene you were playing on was just pure black, but it's like it looks like a shiny black surface with like sprites like just like physically projected into the air, like they're like in 3D. It's super weird.
It's like the chess game in Star Wars like made reality in a way.
Yes,
sort of,
exactly.
yeah. And you can't emulate this, right? You have to see it in person.
Right.
Even if you can emulate this,
but it doesn't. It obviously is nowhere near what.
It's not the same.
Yeah, exactly. I mean the effect can't be emulated. You have to see it in person to understand it.
Yeah. I mean, this is a whole different. This is actually an interesting topic. Stuff like the hologram displays, the vector monitors, Virtual Boy, all these like technologies where you have to have the real hardware in order to understand what it was trying to do.
And they still look
good.
good.
It still looks good. That's a cool theme.
Yeah.
But with the Holosseum covered now, I feel like we can end this episode, guys. So
go to bed.
Once again, thank you everyone for joining us here today. Hopefully you made it all the way to the end. This is just our second episode at this. We're trying our best, but if there's anything you want to see change, you want to see some flow, mix-ups here and there, be sure to let us know. And also, we love your positive feedback as well. But this is just the beginning. The DF Retro Super Show will be back again in just 2 weeks, and we have some other very interesting and rather different topics waiting for you. So, gents, the cast of the DF Retro Super Show, thanks for joining me today.
We're not going to review every single one of these games made now.
We're not going to review every single. If I dropped into that, I think Audi would fall out of his chair. So
summer games.
I'm not going to do that to you. We're not doing it, but that's going to happen again. Just wait. When you least expect it, we're gonna be diving into a list. But check out the digitalfoundry.net site. Check us out on Patreon. Join the retro tier, and you get early access to the show as well as other cool stuff. We have some fun exclusive things planned as well, which we'll be getting to very soon. But that's going to do it for us today from the DF Retro Super Show, and we'll see you soon.